Welcome back to the Marketing Factor podcast. I'm your host, Austin Dandridge, the CEO of Cobble Hill, and today I'm joined with Justin Watt, who is the co-founder of Switchboard, a operations consultancy behind some of the smartest and most scalable workflows in business, including the Notion system that we use at Cobble Hill. With a background that spans MetaLab, IBM, and Stakeholders, Justin blends deep operational experience with a practical automation-first mindset. Justin, thank you so much for coming on the Marketing Factor. I am delighted to have you here, and I'm jealous that you're in Vancouver. Is that right?
I am, and the sun is finally shining, so it's not dreary Vancouver. We're approaching summer mode. Vancouver has 2 seasons, winter and summer, and that's about it. So we're getting out of winter.
My family and I came to Vancouver in October, and it was probably the end of summer mode, but it was still amazing. We had great weather the whole time. I'm so jealous you live there. It's such a cool spot.
Yeah, I take it for granted. I was watching the that Last of Us TV show on HBO, and they filmed a lot of it in Whistler during the winter. So I was like, oh, I forget I live in this climate too, and it's all blizzards and, well, the zombie part isn't a factor here, but blizzard.
It's stunning. I mean, the landscape's incredible. Yeah, I mean, you helped Cobble Hill with our Notion implementation. You were such a pleasure to work with throughout that. And since then, you've even evolved into another agency and you have new systems, and AI has only completely changed since the last time we spoke. I'm interested in hearing about Switchboard. I know that on your site you guys say you scale without enterprise complexity. What does that actually look like in the trenches?
Yeah, we picked that phrase because I think a lot of people are used to hearing about like digital transformation through the lens of these 300-page PowerPoint decks that turn into paperweights, or these implementations that take 18 months with a legion of software developers. And we're in this era where you just don't need that to be able to scale up a business nowadays. There's great off-the-shelf tools. There's, your standard best practices that most teams feel that they're very unique, and they are to a degree on the people side. But at the end of the day, most businesses tend to be a pipeline of workflows, whether that's sales going through their pipeline, and that's more of a formal pipeline, but, service delivery for a business, hiring, all these tend to be, various forms of pipelines. So we help teams basically figure out what the best version of that is for them, and then bring in the right tools to help streamline that as much as possible. So it's without the enterprise complexity, as in we can do that pretty quickly with a smaller team.
So let's start with a common scenario. One we kind of faced a little bit, I suppose, was business is growing fast. Things feel a little chaotic behind the scenes. We were looking to transition from Basecamp to Notion in our case, but where do you look for first to assess where operations are breaking down?
Yeah, we tend to start with, classic stakeholder interviews, but it's really important to hear from the people. And I think a lot of, IBM days, for example, it was a lot of let's talk to leadership and get their hopes and dreams and their thoughts, but that neglects talking to the actual people doing the work in the trenches, so to speak, like you said, day to day. So we usually start with talking with people in kind of leadership to say, what does success look like to you? What are, from the leadership point of view, your common pain points, bottlenecks, all that fun stuff. But then we'll get into the weeds with folks who are in the work and kind of map out the workflow so that we can come back to the team and say, here's what we heard. You have something that right now is, call it 30 steps to do this work. It's all manual. Everyone's chasing each other for information and finding where the spreadsheet is or that file is. And if you did it this way, those 30 steps can become 20, and you can start to layer in things like automation and AI too, to take those 20 steps left over and automate 10 of them, for example.
Well, I guess the question too then is, do you have a framework for deciding if the fix is a better process, a better tool, a better automation? You grade this on a scale. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, when we're working with folks in a strategy mode, we tend to, it's kind of our own framework that after doing it so many times we've created of where are they on, call it the pyramid of technology first and foremost. Because some teams come to us with, their CRM equivalent is literally a whiteboard with sticky notes and a spreadsheet here and there. And some people come to us with, a decade-old Salesforce build out that works, but has a bunch of baggage, so to speak. So often it's kind of understanding the process then allows us to grade them against a framework of, if this is your process, do you have the right technology that can support doing that better? And if they do, great, then it becomes simpler because it's really fine-tuning the process and making sure the tools are talking. And if they don't have the technology, then usually it's recommendations on, hey, have you heard of Notion? Have you heard of, these more modern tools that are built for the way modern teams work? It's not just a folder structure on the C drive somewhere that everyone's digging through. And B, those tools tend to quote unquote talk to each other. That's part of our goal, is to make sure that there's no one magical tool out there that solves everything a business needs. So in the absence of that, how do we connect tools and make things kind of talk to each other, so to speak?
I love that. I think a lot of people hear the word AI and think they need to overhaul everything, right? What are some low lift, high impact automations that you think most teams could implement tomorrow?
Yeah, I think we try to work with teams. Like, I think a lot of the, maybe to your point, the snake oil or the fluff out there about AI is on an individual level of, oh, you can throw this spreadsheet in or this PDF doc and it'll summarize it in ChatGPT. And yes, that's great and all, but that doesn't really help a team function. That helps parts of people's individuals' roles function. So the low hanging fruit tends to be, if we can streamline those process steps, then which of those processes tends to be a lot of kind of manual creation of things. A good example is teams who are moving from like a sales motion to a service delivery motion. They're handing something off to a team. If you've got things like AI note takers joining your sales calls, if you're, again, going back to that kind of analogy around connecting the dots and the tools and the data with each other, if you've got a CRM that is connected to your AI note taker, and you're putting in basic information, when you're handing things off to service delivery, I find a lot of teams get stuck with, well, what did you talk about? What is the purpose of this project? Yes. And so the low hanging fruit turns into, well, when you integrate an AI automation that when you move something in your CRM to a certain pipeline stage, it goes and grabs the transcripts. It will do some, call it internet research. Even it's wild to even see, just plugging in the URL of the company that you're working with, what it can find out about that company in a few minutes, and kind of bringing those pieces together to create essentially a dossier, so to speak, on that client, what you're doing for them, and have that spun up for a team so that, hour and a half of work for a salesperson to go create all that, or more often than not, they don't want to do that. So they just book a meeting with the team and they explain what is only in their head in that moment, what they can remember from the sales process. It tends to be streamlined by AI. And that's just kind of one low hanging fruit of, well, why don't we take all of that and give a team a dossier and project brief, so to speak, spun up for them within minutes, kind of thing.
Does anything scare you about that? Like just the lack of thinking that has to transpire between those two functions that you're describing, the sales to service side of things, where there actually used to be collaboration. In a sense, in a perfect world, there was collaboration, but the way that you describe it there seems beautiful and efficient, but I wonder if it scares you at all.
Yeah, a little. We say this to teams often, if you start from the thesis that all of your work is going to be automated and you don't have to worry about it anymore, you are in for a bad time. And that's what scares me, is teams that think we just turn all this on and we can sit back on a beach somewhere and maybe one day we'll get there, but we're certainly not there yet. So often what I say to folks is, consider AI kind of the 80-20 rule. Hour and a half that you might have needed to spend to do what I just explained as a quick use case or low-hanging fruit example could then be 20 minutes instead of an hour and a half, or 80% of it is done for you, but there's still the 20% in terms of, well, a team should have a meeting to talk through all of that and discuss anything that wasn't captured or talk about the nuance or the relationship, things to keep in mind. So I think it scares me for teams who are overthinking it or having their hopes and expectations set too high. But if your expectations are, this is going to augment and support us saving time and make things easier, then it usually leads to a good place. But if you think it's going to all be done for you, that's what scares me a little bit.
That's a great point. I think, where I've found a ton of benefit is on the finance side, and specifically, projections, either internal finance, or we work with a lot of e-commerce businesses. So we're helping them project revenue based on data, year-over-year analysis. Have you found, is there a team that what team function tends to benefit the most, the fastest from automation, would you say?
I would say teams like customer support, finance, like teams that already have data points. So customer support I bring up because usually if you've got, again, the right systems in place, you can see the ticket history, you can see who that person is that's submitting it, you can see what product they're using or what service you're providing for them or whatever it might be. And so any team that has enough, call it data points, to feed into the AI tend to benefit from it the most. It's the teams that this could be any department, but realistically, it's the teams that have, their business runs on 20 spreadsheets on people's local hard drives, and they say, we want AI to fix it. It's like, well, where is it going to go look? Where is that data? Is it structured? Obviously but the teams that function on, whiteboards with sticky notes on it, they're not ready for AI. So it really comes down to how much data that team has. And finance is usually a good example because finance is so data-based. It literally that entire world revolves around spreadsheets and having structured data, so to speak. These are columns and rows and headers and whatnot, whereas a design team usually doesn't benefit a ton from AI in terms of it speeding up your process. Maybe the image generation is getting there, or video generation, but in terms of their actual process, it's very unstructured, creative discipline. So they don't tend to have a lot to work with. And you can help there with the process side, but the actual creative act tends to be unstructured for good reason by its nature.
One thing I have found on the creative side of things that does help is putting together better briefs, creative briefs for as an output to share with the team, and then potentially, create an agenda to walk through with the team that feels a little bit more efficient for everyone involved, right? Being able to pull in lots of inspiration, lots of competitor analysis, taking a look at just the general aesthetic. We do a lot of brand questionnaires too. So taking that and then helping to formulate that into a more cohesive document. Whereas before, that process for us would take couple hours really to put together a creative brief for, which now seems to me something that we can generate pretty quickly. I don't think the image generation or the video generation is going to supplement true photo and video generation. From a creative side, for at least the work we do, ads and emails, it might help with retouching and stuff like that. But I do wonder about larger enterprise businesses and how they tend to utilize creative already and think of it more as a commodity. How do you think about that?
I've seen a lot of folks try, and again, it goes back to expectation setting. I think that, some of the teams that I've seen do it or that we've worked with that are larger, if their expectations are set that if we create one ad, then we can get all the variations, the 50 variations. Let's say that ad is meant for, 20 different markets and they want 20 variations. If they're just replacing, to your point, retouching little things here and there, then, the image generation that's come out even in the last few months can start to help with that. If we go back a year ago, they were all let down constantly because it would completely massacre, for lack of a better word, the creative stuff that was done because it couldn't replicate the text. It didn't understand the nuance of why that designer chose that gradient on that because that fits the brand image or whatever it might be. So there's the expectation setting. If you're looking for streamlining the process, yes. If you're looking for replacing the creative process, I think even enterprise teams are a little bit let down. And it is getting better. That's the wild part of we went from kind of yearly big moments with AI advancement to quarterly to monthly. And now we're at weekly, where it's advancing so much that things that we're talking about today might be possible in just a few weeks, kind of thing.
Yeah, I would be interested to hearing your take if you think we are a year away from AGI. If you think AGI is not possible, where do you fall in that spectrum? And you don't have to make a prediction or anything, but I'm curious as to how you think about AGI.
Yeah, the main thing that we see firsthand that impacts teams' ability to have AI truly help them, and therefore I believe the biggest impediment or bottleneck to AGI is context windows. So to very quickly explain, context windows are token counts. You might have heard that phrase before. People experience this every day when they're using ChatGPT. You throw in, to your point, you're doing some financial analysis and you throw in a few Excel files and then you talk back and forth with it for a bit. Maybe you want to throw in a PDF with some context about the business. It starts to lose the plot after a while. You talk with it for half an hour and you're realizing it's forgetting things you've already talked about, or it's not considering some of the files that you uploaded earlier. And so that is essentially the memory of LLMs and AI right now is not large enough for it to be able to consider so much context that it can understand not only who's your client that you're building a brief for, but who's the team that's on it? What is their performance and skill set like? What is the industry analysis? All of these different things that go into our brains to think about the context to make better decisions. The memory essentially, or context window, is not large enough for LLMs to really do what we do as humans. And so that is kind of the biggest technological bottleneck, in my opinion, around AGI. And once we solve that, then I think we're probably pretty quick, as they call it, a fast takeoff to AGI. But until that's solved, which it does seem to be improving kind of every quarter, but not fast enough that I would say AGI is coming this year kind of thing. Current prediction is still around 2027, but we'll see.
And what do you think the implications of AGI are?
Broad and vast. If we're talking about it through the lens of businesses and teams, agents are a good example of things that work well on paper, but you need that context window to have an agent say, well, you're giving me this information. I'm going to go think through, on the research agent is going to go figure stuff out. The design agent is going to go create a design. The account manager agent is going to go think about the client impacts to this. And all of that gets summarized into here's the brief, here's the design concepts, here's how you should message it, that kind of thing. The implications there with AGI is that right now you need a lot of structured data. You need it in a way that machines can understand, and you need to give it piecemeal so that when you hit context window limits, it's not losing the plot and you're kind of factoring that in. Whereas with AGI, it figures that out, so to speak. So I know that's a broad answer, but thinking through the lens of kind of business applications, a lot of things that we have to manage around and that humans have to input and know to input for context is solved, which is wild to think.
It's powerful. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a powerful thing. You think of the implications of that are pretty vast for a business, not to mention humanity. Back to the positive things though about AI, let's talk about like the tools that you use. Kind of if you had desert island picks, what are the tools that you find yourself recommending again and again because they just work?
Say, depending on team size and kind of what their business is, the two most common that we recommend for kind of the small to mid-market businesses is Notion and Airtable. Partly because you can use those tools in a way that teams can work with. It's not like a big database backend that you have to be really technical to go understand how everything is structured. You can set it up in a way that humans can, so to speak, can use it, not software developers and machines only. The benefit there is that you get structured data, and you have to have structured data for AI to work well. So we recommend those for that reason. And then also Airtable and Notion because they have wonderful AI tools built right into them. They plug into other tools. A lot of AI tools are really kind of trying to create their own moat. So they quickly are becoming walled gardens where you sign up for this tool, but it doesn't talk to the 10 other that you use. And that's the way that teams work nowadays. There is no one magical tool that every team uses, and it solves for everything from finance and sales to service delivery and account management. You're using multiple tools. So any tool that will plug into others like Notion and Airtable do really well is part of the reason we recommend those often too.
So how do you help the teams kind of balance the flexibility and the structure for something like Notion, Airtable, that seemingly can get bloated pretty quickly?
Yeah, Notion candidly is a little bit harder, I'm sure, as you've probably experienced yourself. When everything is possible, then it feels a bit overwhelming. So making sure that a team is trained, and I think that's the biggest part that people forget about AI adoption, automation adoption, even just better tools and systems in general, and kind of the change management, so to speak, of evolving your process and the way that you work as a company is the people side. So you can't solve for it completely because we're humans. We forget, we make mistakes, we try to work around things to serve our own benefit, whatever it might be. So the training and kind of adoption rollout to people is really important for them to understand little things. But if you make this change, it will impact everyone else, or it will break this, whatever that might be. And some of these tools are getting better. I think that they've probably gotten a lot of feedback. So they're recognizing, well, we should be able to change different permission structures based on the view or the user that's logged in, things like that. But by and large, I think a lot of folks forget that it's really the human side that solves for that.
Yeah, that's true. What should founders, operators, employees be doing now to kind of prepare their teams or themselves to use AI, not just as kind of a bolt-on, but as kind of a core part of how they work?
I think what I see with leadership teams often, and I know that you're a champion of this with your team, but I think it's what you're doing or what you've done is kind of indicative of what good leaders do, which is making it okay to use this stuff for teams. I think a lot of teams they feel that if they admit that they're using AI or they want a tool that will streamline and cut down on their workload, that's admitting defeat or lack of skills or whatever it might be. But I think when leaders set the tone of you should want to use these things as long as you're doing it the right way, that is a good thing. We as a business want that. And then employees, I do think it's just like any new era of tools. There was the adoption of Excel from, spreadsheets on paper. And then there was the adoption of email from mailing letters and doing phone calls all the time, et cetera. Same thing applies with this era too, of it's people's willingness to learn and not wait to be told how to use it or neglect it and everyone else passes them by. So I think it's just being open to change, which goes to the business level of, I think that a lot of teams, I very strongly believe after seeing it firsthand, that a lot of teams are looking at AI as in, how do we add this to what we're already doing, which is kind of a false premise to start with. It's how do we change the way that we work so that this benefits us, not thinking the benefit will be adding it to doing something as they've always done it. This era of AI presents a really good opportunity for folks to rethink how they work. As in, do we really need a 30-step process? Could this be 20? and how much of those 20 that are left could AI do for us versus let's keep it at 30. Let's just see where AI bolts on, as you said. It's a different way to think.
I find myself constantly reevaluating the processes every single day at Cobble Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. And you start thinking about, we can use AI to swap out the background of a photo here. Why are we not doing this already? Why are we still relying on the designer to do this? Now, literally anyone can do this. You don't have to understand Photoshop to do a photo swap very easily. You can do this in Canva or very simple programs, or even just ChatGPT now. There's so much advancement that I just find myself, I cannot get stuck to a set of processes as you would prefer to call them.
Whatever.
That I think it's exciting, I mean, it's cool. It's kind of a fun way to work. You think through this whole, people who went to business school 20 years ago learned this whole way of doing things. It's just being upended, on a daily basis, which is really cool to kind of live through and not have to suffer through some sort of crazy managerial style things. Justin, what books have you read recently that kind of have really stuck with you?
I really, really enjoyed, I imagine you're familiar with Stripe. The kind of their first big exec hire outside of the founders was a woman, Claire Hughes Johnson, who came from Google and was their COO. And she joined Stripe, I forget at what size, but it was in like the low hundreds, and she scaled them to thousands. And she, being in a tech business, understands how technology can help and is also very human focused on the COO side. So I highly recommend that book to folks. I'm blanking on the name, but I'll send you the link after if you want to add it to show notes. But
definitely,
Claire Hughes Johnson book on kind of scaling the operations of a company was really great. And I find I'm reading more of that than AI books, partly because things are progressing so fast. So by the time a book comes out, most of it's moot. I'm actually not really sure why there's so many AI books being published, because that's probably the most archaic way to stay on top of AI progress. But I do think that, to your earlier point, this is a fun time. And I think a lot of people are viewing it as a scary time because what do we do? How do we go about it? But if you have the foundational side of, well, this is how you free up people's time. This is how you take care of people. Because as much as AI is advancing, there's still a ton of work to do. No one ever says, I've got enough time in my week. Everyone is always feeling like I never got enough done and there's never enough time. So realistically, AI is just here to, in my opinion, help make sure that, you can have more time to focus on the important things. And so books like hers really help you think, I find, about the operational side of, well, people have more time. How can we be more effective as a team and as a business?
I love that. Yeah. Justin, thanks so much for coming on The Marketing Factor. Where can people find out more about you, about everything you're doing at Switchboard?
Yeah, probably the website's the quickest place to start, just with switchboard.com. And then on socials, just Justin Watt. And I'm usually trying to distill down a lot of the AI news and remove the fluff and snake oil. So LinkedIn and Twitter tends to be where I post the most if people want to check it out.
Amazing. Thanks.